Hey 302, I'm Jackie Ferris. We are hunkering down for the holidays, and that means Clovis and I are going to be bringing you shows from Christmas past. This week we visit Yuletide at Winterthur. It's a gorgeous show, and I'm sure it's going to put you in the holiday mood. Hey 302, I'm Jackie Ferris. We're at Winterthur and it's the holidays, so that means Yuletide. It's been going on for about 40 years, and I'm joined now by Deborah Harper. She is the curator of Yuletide to tell us all about it. Deborah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for being here.
So what is Yuletide all about?
Well, Yuletide at Winterthur is a walk through time to explore how Americans celebrated Christmas from the mid-1700s up to the mid-20th century. And so it's a tour through holiday displays that recreate vignettes of different time periods, some of which refer to how the DuPonts celebrated Christmas when they lived at Winterthur in the 1930s and 40s, but others which reach back much further in time for inspiration.
So this has been going on for 40 years.
It has.
And you kind of had an interactive thing last year where you asked folks what are the greatest hits.
Exactly.
So how did that work out?
Well, we surveyed people both on site and on social media and basically gave them choices. What do they most want to see from the past 40 years of Yuletide at Winterthur? What do they most want to see again? And we had about 1,600 responses. And so those responses became the basis around which this tour was built. So we have displays that first appeared here 40 years ago in 1979, and others that are much more recent for their first manifestation. This display that we see right now first appeared on tour in 2017, but it was one of the hits, so it's back again.
So this is Queen Victoria's Christmas trees. Tell me about that.
Okay, so Christmas trees in the 19th century were really only known in very elite households in Europe. They were not something that the common people celebrated. But in the mid-19th century, Queen Victoria's family had been setting up Christmas trees since the late 18th century. And she had celebrated with Christmas trees, and the newspaper, the London Illustrated News, came and did a spread, mass media, with photographs showing the royals' Christmas trees. And once the populace saw this, the idea just caught on like wildfire. The following year, the same illustration was put into an American magazine, Godey's Ladies Book, and the idea caught on like wildfire in America. And that's when Christmas trees really started to become popular, both in England and in America.
So what kind of ornaments would you expect to find? I mean, will you find when you come and see Yuletide and this exhibit here?
In this particular tree, this is before there was a commercial ornament industry. And so there are descriptions of what was on Queen Victoria's tree, and she had gilded gingerbread, and she had gilded nuts, and bags of candy, and cornucopia, and candles on the tree that were red, white, and blue candles, the colors of the British Union Jack. And then gifts would be put under the tree, much as we do today.
So when you look at a tree like this, it's really takes you back, and that's what you want to do here, is to share a little bit of Christmas, but also educate people, right?
Definitely. We want people to enjoy the visuals and say, oh, that's so beautiful, I'd like to try doing something like that, but also maybe take away a little bit of understanding of where some of these traditions originated.
And they're also going to get a lot of history from the DuPonts
as
well.
Yes, several of our rooms will focus on how the DuPonts celebrated Christmas when they lived here at Winterthur.
Now, you mentioned that there are several rooms that we're going to check out in just a little bit, but all of this comes together over the years, 40 years. I mean, how do you plan for this kind of thing? Do you have everything like stashed away somewhere and you pull it out, or how does this work?
Yes, I do have everything stashed away. I have rooms here in the museum where some of my things are stored. I have rooms in our office wing. I have an entire 2-car garage. I have a complex out in the woods that has some buildings where things are stored. So they are all over the property at this point in time, and we pull them together each year to create different displays.
So how long does it take, especially, I mean, this is a big undertaking, I would imagine, to pull all this together?
Well, we start designing it the previous year. So I knew certainly by February what the tour was going to be and what it was going to look like and what objects would be displayed. In terms of bringing out all the decoration, we start doing that at the end of October and gather things up from the various storage areas and put them into places where they're more convenient. So when people are actually in these rooms installing the displays, they have a central area to go to get the various decorations that are all labeled for them that they're going to use.
Now, I would imagine that all of the displays are as detailed as Queen Victoria's trees. So how do we know what we're looking at?
You know what you're looking at because this is a guided tour experience, and so all of our guides are trained to interpret these displays. They understand the history that's being presented, and so they're able to tell stories about these particular displays and why they're here and what was special about them.
Now, we're actually at the second stop. The first stop is a town square. Can you talk to me about that?
Sure, that's the market square in our courtyard. It's in the basement of the house, and it's an amazing place to be because one is literally in a town square. There are actual house facades that were brought here from elsewhere, houses that were built along the eastern seaboard, and when the houses were torn down, their facades were brought here for preservation. And so in that courtyard, we have set up a market square from the mid-19th century. We chose that time period because, of course, people had to shop for Christmas preparations then, just as they do today, but the shopping venue was a bit different, and particularly in the mid-19th century, that's when greenery first was being sold commercially, being brought in from the country, and people would set up temporary stalls for Christmas trees, just like they do today, and sell greenery and wreaths and ropes that people could buy to put in their houses.
It's really amazing because when you walk through, there's a lot of sound. It sounds like you're actually in that market square. And I guess that's probably the case. You guys really go above and beyond to stage each of your rooms, and we're going to see some more of those rooms when we come back.
I'm Deborah Hughes, curator at the Hagley Museum of Library, and I love sharing our history ideas with the 302.
Welcome back. We're at Winterthur talking about Yuletide. I'm joined by Deborah, and we are now in a room that's themed Harry's Party. Talk to me about that.
Yes. Mr. Harry's Party was an annual event when Winterthur was a private estate for decades. There is a clubhouse on the property for all the estate workers. There were a couple hundred people who lived here who worked for the DuPonts. And so they had a clubhouse where they could have their own parties and entertainments. And there's a stage in it, it still exists. And each year, Mr. DuPont would host a party for all of the staff. And so they would come on Christmas Eve. He would hire professional entertainers through the Schubert Theater in Philadelphia who would come and perform here. He would go to the local John Wanamaker's store and he would pick out all the gifts himself that were being given to the estate children. They would have ice cream from the milk of the famous Winterthur dairy cattle, and the gifts would be distributed and there would be performances, and it was a great tradition. The whole family came, any of the guests whom the DuPonts were entertaining for Christmas came, and then a couple hundred staff people would come to this party as well.
Now, how did you recreate this? Just by writings, or were there pictures?
Unfortunately, there aren't any pictures, but we do have the clubhouse, so we know what its configuration is. And this room approximates its configuration. It is a fully paneled room. It's just larger than this. So we do have that. We have actually many staff at Winterthur who worked for the DuPonts and who have stayed on to work for Winterthur. And so we have a number of staff who actually went to this party, and they're able to talk about their experience at the party. Plus we have all of the receipts for the performers who were hired, for the gifts that were purchased, the records from the John Wanamaker store of everything that Mr. DuPont bought every single year. The whole store would close down, and it was open just for Mr. DuPont to come in and do his shopping for this party for all of the estate workers. So we have those records.
Now, what kinds of things, you have ice cream,
Yes.
of course, so what kinds of things would the workers receive as gifts?
Well, the adults, each family got a turkey, they got a basket of fruit, they got candy for the adults. The real emphasis, of course, was on the children. And so Mr. DuPont would choose gifts for the boys and the girls appropriate to their ages. And so perhaps, the 10-year-old boys, any 10-year-old boy in a given year would get a bicycle, or a 5-year-old girl might get a doll. And so he would choose those presents, and then his staff would wrap them all in white paper with Christmas stickers. You can see some replicated over there. And the children would be given the gifts by the DuPonts at the party.
Now, one of the highlights of this room is somebody that pops in and out.
Yes.
Talk about that.
When we first did this display a couple of years ago, we had the magicians represented up on stage, and we had a stuffed rabbit that was just sitting in the hat. And so many visitors came in and said, oh, it would be so cool if the rabbit came up out of the hat. And so when we did it this year, I said to my assistant, somehow make that rabbit pop up out of the hat. And so we found someone who was willing to custom build a table with a mechanism with a rabbit that could periodically pop up out of the hat for our visitors. It's just something they wanted, so we did it.
That's one thing you have to make sure that you see when you come on the tour.
Yes, definitely.
One of the rooms that I think is really beautiful is the Chinese room, which is the DuPont family Christmas, right?
Correct, correct. We see a representation of their Christmas tree from the 1930s. And then it was their custom that everyone who was a guest of the DuPonts for Christmas would have a market basket with a tag on it with his or her name on it. And the baskets would be put underneath the Christmas tree. And all the gifts for an individual would be put into his or her basket. And then on Christmas afternoon, they would come in after lunch and everybody would find his or her basket and open up their gifts. Many of the gifts are wrapped in cellophane, which is a DuPont company product that was being heavily promoted in the 1930s as a Christmas gift wrapping.
So there was no real surprise when it came to some of those presents, I would imagine.
You know, people often ask us, what do you buy a DuPont? And in fact, we have lists. Mr. DuPont kept lists of everything. Well, Mrs. DuPont had to keep them so the girls could write their thank you notes. And so we have lists of all the gifts, and they're very ordinary things. Books were very commonly given. Mr. DuPont would give his wife and daughters jewelry. There would be candied nuts, and there would be ties, just like today. It's nothing really extravagant. People expect to see Tiffany boxes and mink stoles, but they were giving, you know, the very ordinary kind of things that we would give today.
Now, that room, what time period are
That
we talking
particular
about?
room, is we're talking about the 1930s in there.
And the tree, is it indicative of the kinds of ornaments that were
Yes.
used back then?
Definitely. Mr. DuPont specifically had a Christmas tree that had the colored lights on it, the multicolored lights and glass ornaments. And so that's what you're seeing on that tree, is ornaments from the first half of the 20th century decorating a tree with multicolored lights. And it was actually quite unusual still in the 1930s. Most people didn't have Christmas trees yet. And so to have a tree with electric lights when the majority of American houses weren't electrified until after the 1930s had ended. So that was a really special thing, to have a tree that size all done up with electric lights.
Now, another room that's really gorgeous is DuPont's childhood Christmas.
Yes, a much smaller tree, a much simpler tree. We represent a tree from the 1890 time period, so it's a tabletop tree. It has homemade ornaments on it. It's decorated with candles to light it. And of course, the candles were inherently dangerous. And so the custom typically was that the tree literally would be lit on Christmas Day when people first came in to see it and ooh and ah over it. And then those candles would be quickly extinguished. So you didn't get to enjoy a lighted tree the way we do today. But it was homemade ornaments, and we have some gifts of the time period as well, representing the sorts of things that Mr. DuPont would have received as a child. In fact, we have a couple of books there that we know he was in fact given for his Christmas present in 1890.
That's just fascinating. There are so many rooms dressed up for Yuletide here at Winterthur, and we're going to take a look at another one when we come back.
I'm Rob Swanson, bass player with the Cartoon Christmas Trio, born and raised in the 302.
Welcome back. We're now in the conservatory, and that is a 15-foot floral tree behind us. Deborah, tell me about that.
That tree is a Yuletide at Winterthur tradition, and it is spectacular. I have never seen a dried flower tree that surpasses it. It was something that was introduced in 1985. Our floral designers, on a whim, decided to do a tree that they felt would honor Mr. DuPont's love for the Winterthur garden. And this is what they created. And the visitors so loved this tree that although other displays come and go, that tree remains a standard part of Yuletide at Winterthur. We must have the dried flower tree. If we did not have the dried flower tree, we would hear about it from our public.
So talk about the process. I mean, you'd think, oh, that's a lot of flowers. Where did they get them from? But it's kind of like almost like recycling.
It is recycling. We have fresh floral displays in the house all year long. And so each week, as the old flowers are taken out and new ones are put in, when the old arrangements are broken down, the floral designers take the blossoms that are in good condition and they dry them. Some of them are air dried, some of them are dried using silica gel. It depends on the blossom. I have a room elsewhere in another building that has a dehumidifier going constantly and the temperature kept very high to wick out the moisture as quickly as possible. That's how you hold on to the color of the blossoms. And so these flowers are all things that people have already seen in floral arrangements in the house.
So when these flowers are assembled after they're dried, there's an actual tree under them.
There is. People often ask about that. What's the basis for it? And it is an actual cut tree that is under there, not something we cut from the property. We get it from a commercial grower. And so our horticulturists bring the tree in and install that, and then the electricians come and they put the lights on, and the electricians are always very gallant about putting the tree topper on for the floral designers as well. And then the ladies are in here for a couple of days on many ladders up and down, putting all of these flowers onto the Christmas tree.
And when Christmas is over, what happens to the tree?
Well, the flowers are often donated. At various times, different groups or entities have requested dried flowers for something that they're doing. Sometimes we use them here at Winterthur to make tussie-mussies and things for school children to do. But then whatever's left on the tree at the end, as well as the tree itself, goes into our compost heap.
Now, it's huge, but it's also here for a reason. This is where one of the Christmas trees used to be, right?
Yes, when Mr. DuPont lived here in the 1930s and 40s, he had his Christmas tree here in the conservatory, and his was a 15 to 18-foot Christmas tree. It's the one that you see replicated in the Chinese parlor with the colored glass lights and the glass ornaments on it. Except his was out here in the conservatory and was bigger than the one that you see in the Chinese parlor.
Now, do you have any idea how many Christmas trees you have in the Yuletide display?
In the Yuletide display this year, there are 22 decorated Christmas trees, between 3 feet and 15 feet tall.
Wow, but this is the largest.
This is the largest, yes.
Now, I noticed that whenever we were going through and looking at all the beautifully decorated rooms, there was a bedroom that was decorated quite nicely.
Yes.
Talk to me about that.
That represents a child celebration in the latter half of the 19th century. And it's interesting to see a Christmas tree in a bedroom. We don't do that today, but there are lots of magazine illustrations from the latter half of the 1800s showing children waking up to see their Christmas tree in their bedroom. And the custom was that the gift giver would come in secret and decorate the tree for the children. And when they woke up in the morning, there it was. And often it would have the candy and fruit and toys on it that were the gift for the children. And so the children would get up and take their gifts right off the Christmas tree, and then you were done with the tree. It wasn't a decoration the way it is today. It was a way of distributing gifts.
So whenever you look in that room, there are all kinds of toys and the tree and everything. So are those artifacts or are those things that you acquired to kind of stage the room?
Both. Some of them are artifacts from our collection. Some of them we borrow from other museums if we want a particular toy that we don't have in our collection. And others, the wrapped packages, for example, are perfectly modern things that we put in to fill out the display. So it's a combination of things that we've borrowed, things that Winterthur owns, and things that we just use to supplement and fill it out.
You said that you also make things,
Yes.
but you have to be careful about the items that you choose. Why is that?
Well, whenever you see any kind of faux food, be it a cookie on a Christmas tree or food on a dining table, we have to be very careful of the materials we bring into the museum. This is getting a little bit technical, but artificial materials do something that's called off-gassing. They emit fumes, and that means that gas particles are moving through the air. And so if those particles land on collection objects, particularly metals, there's a danger that over time they're going to build up and pit those metals. And so we have to make sure we bring in materials that are museum safe. And so we have to get the material safety data sheet and give it to our conservators, and they will analyze the materials and they'll give us an okay and say, yes, you can use this in the museum, or no, you can't. You have to find something else.
So every single thing you see, a lot of thought goes
Oh,
behind
absolutely. Collection safety, protecting the collection, make sure it's always here and in pristine shape for people to enjoy, that's paramount. So we work around that imperative and create our displays keeping that in mind.
So if somebody wants to see the greatest hits of Yuletide, how do they find out more?
Sure, well, you can easily go to our website, winterthur.org, and you can find descriptions of it there. There are tickets that you can buy online for the tour. The tour opens on Saturday, November 23rd, and it runs through January 5th. We are closed on Thanksgiving Day and Christmas Day, but we're open New Year's Day, and we have a special celebration that is a New Year's calling, which was, again, a DuPont family tradition, where on New Year's Day, all the DuPont family goes and travels to different DuPont family houses, and they meet in hostess groups and bring each other gifts. This has been their custom since the early 1800s. And so we have a New Year's calling celebration here, where visitors who come on New Year's Day are given refreshments, they're given a gift, there are craft activities, and we make it really a special day for starting off the new year. And this year, a new decade, so that makes it all the better.
Sounds like it's going to be a great time.
I think so.
Deborah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate you being here.
We'll be right back. That'll do it for this week's episode. Until next time, Clovis and I will see you on the 302.